Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observation deck's thick glass, watching the alien landscape stretch endlessly below their transport ship. The Kepler 442b colony had been humanity's greatest achievement in space exploration, but even after 2 years of living here, the sight of the massive creatures roaming the purple grasslands still took her breath away. "First time seeing a Titanoth up close?" asked Commander Mills, joining her at the window. Sarah shook her head. "Third time this month, but I still can't believe how enormous they are." The creature below was easily the size of a city block, its 6 tree-trunk legs carrying a body that could house a small town. Its thick, leathery hide was covered in patches of what looked like living moss, and 2 massive tusks curved gracefully from its elongated head. The Titanoth moved with surprising grace for something so massive, each step causing small tremors that their ship could detect even at this altitude. "The Zephyrians have been living alongside these things for over 3,000 years, Mills said, checking his tablet. "According to their records, there used to be hundreds of them. Now there are only 12 left on the entire planet." Sarah frowned. "What happened to the others?" "Natural causes, mostly. These things live for about 2,000 years, so losing population is normal. But the Zephyrians are worried about this particular one." Mills pointed to the Titanoth below. "They call it Corvash. It's been limping for the past 2 centuries. 2 centuries? Sarah's medical instincts immediately kicked in. "And they haven't done anything about it?" Mills shrugged. "They tried their traditional methods, herbal treatments, energy healing, some kind of spiritual ceremonies. Nothing worked. They've basically accepted that it's just getting old." Sarah continued watching the massive creature. Even from this distance, she could see the slight favor it gave to its rear left leg. Each step seemed calculated to minimize weight on that particular foot. As a xenobiology specialist and trauma surgeon, she'd seen countless injuries across dozens of species since humanity began its expansion into space. Something about Corvash's movement patterns triggered her professional curiosity. "Request permission to conduct a closer examination," she said suddenly. Commander Mills looked at her with surprise. "Sarah, that thing weighs about 50,000 tons. One wrong move and you'd be paced under its foot." "I've worked with dangerous megafauna before. Remember the crystal bears on Titan 7? Those were the size of elephants, not skyscrapers." Sarah turned from the window, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Sir, with respect, I didn't become the first human xenobiological surgeon by playing it safe. If this creature is suffering, maybe there's something we can do. It could be a gesture of goodwill toward the Zephyrians." Mills considered this. The relationship between humans and the native Zephyrians had been cordial but distant since the colony's establishment. The insectoid aliens were peaceful, but maintained a cautious attitude toward their new human neighbors. A successful medical intervention might open doors to deeper cooperation. "I'll contact Ambassador Thrixek," Mills said finally. "But if they agree to let you examine Corvash, you're taking a full security team and every safety precaution in the book." 3 days later, Sarah found herself standing in a Zephyrian settlement that looked like something from a fever dream. The buildings were grown rather than built, massive organic structures that pulsed with a faint bioluminescence. The Zephyrians themselves were graceful beings, standing nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and crystalline wings that caught the light of Kepler 442b's binary suns. Ambassador Thrixek approached her with the characteristic clicking sounds that served as their formal greeting. Through the universal translator, his voice came across as melodious but concerned. "Human Dr. Chen, we are grateful for your offer to examine Great Corvash. But we must warn you, many of our finest healers have attempted to ease its suffering over the decades. The Great Ones are beyond our understanding in many ways." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I appreciate the warning, Ambassador. I'd like to review any medical records or treatments that have been attempted." Thrixek's antennae twitched in what Sarah had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of a grimace. Our records show 17 different healing ceremonies, 43 applications of traditional herbal remedies, and 6 attempts at surgical intervention by our best tissue weavers. Surgical intervention? Our healers can manipulate living tissue to some degree. They attempted to repair what damage they could reach. But Great Corvash's hide is nearly 3 feet thick in most places. Our tools could barely penetrate the surface layers. Sarah felt a familiar excitement building. This was exactly the kind of challenge that had driven her to specialize in xenobiology. I'd like to see those surgical reports, and I'll need to conduct my own examination. Do you have any kind of scanning equipment? We do, but it has limitations with creatures of Corvash's size and density. 6 hours later, Sarah was reviewing holographic displays of the Zephyrian scan data in their medical facility. The technology was impressive, though clearly designed for beings much smaller than the Titanoth. What she could see was concerning, but not hopeless. The infection appears to be deep in the bone structure, she explained to the assembled Zephyrian healers. Your scans show significant inflammation in what I assume is the equivalent of the metatarsal area. The lead healer, an elderly Zephyrian named Vithara, made a sound like wind chimes. We suspected as much, but reaching such depths seemed impossible. Great Corvash's bone density is like stone. Sarah pulled up another scan. The good news is that the infection appears to be localized. It hasn't spread to other parts of the leg or into the bloodstream. The bad news is that without treatment, it will eventually cause permanent joint damage and potentially systemic infection. Human doctor, Thrixek interjected, what would your people require to attempt a healing? Sarah took a deep breath. First, I'll need to get much closer to examine the actual wound site. Second, I'll need to bring in some specialized equipment from our colony. And third, we'll need to find a way to keep Corvash calm during the procedure. The Great Ones are intelligent, Vithara said. Corvash has allowed our healers to approach many times. It seems to understand that we wish to help. That's encouraging. How close have your healers been able to get? Close enough to touch the affected area, though working on it is difficult due to the size and thickness of the infected tissue. Sarah nodded, her mind already formulating a plan. I'll need 3 days to prepare. Can you arrange for me to make preliminary contact with Corvash? The next morning found Sarah standing at the edge of a vast clearing where Corvash had been resting for the past week. The Titanoth was even more impressive up close, its breathing creating small windstorms that rustled the alien grass around them. Sarah could see the affected foot clearly now, and her heart sank at what she observed. The creature's rear left foot was visibly swollen, with discolored patches along the sole that indicated deep tissue infection. What made it worse was the obvious adaptation Corvash had made over the centuries, shifting its weight distribution to compensate for the pain. The other leg showed signs of stress from carrying extra load for so long. It's been suffering like this for 200 years, she whispered to Thrixek, who had accompanied her. Great Corvash has never complained, the ambassador replied. The Great Ones endure. Sarah felt a surge of determination. Well, endurance is admirable, but healing is better. She approached slowly, following the protocols the Zephyrian healers had shared with her. Corvash's massive head turned toward her as she got closer, and she found herself looking into eyes the size of dinner plates. There was an intelligence there that took her breath away, and something else that made her chest tighten with emotion. Pain. This magnificent creature had been in constant pain for longer than most civilizations had existed. "Hello, beautiful," she said softly, reaching out to touch the thick hide of Corvash's leg. The skin was warm and surprisingly soft despite its thickness. "I'm going to help you if I can." Corvash made a sound like distant thunder, but didn't pull away from her touch. If anything, the massive creature seemed to shift slightly to give her better access to the injured area. Sarah spent the next 2 hours conducting her examination, taking readings with her portable scanner and collecting tissue samples where possible. What she found confirmed her worst fears and her greatest hopes. The infection was severe and had been spreading slowly for decades. Left untreated, it would eventually prove fatal. But it was also exactly the kind of deep bone infection that human medicine had learned to treat effectively over the past century. "I can help you," she told Corvash, placing both hands flat against the creature's leg. "But it's going to require some pretty major surgery." The Titanoth's response was another rumbling sound that somehow conveyed both hope and resignation. That evening, Sarah presented her findings to a joint meeting of Zephyrian healers and human colony leadership via video link. "The infection is caused by what appears to be a bacterial organism that's similar to osteomyelitis in human bones," she explained, showing the scan results. "It's been slowly eating away at the bone structure in Corvash's foot for probably 50 years or more. The good news is that we have effective treatments for this type of infection." "What kind of treatments?" asked Dr. Patel from the human colony. "Combination antibiotic therapy and surgical debridement. We'll need to remove the infected bone tissue and surrounding areas, then treat with broad-spectrum antibiotics that I'll need to modify for Corvash's physiology." Commander Mills appeared on the screen looking skeptical. "Sarah, you're talking about performing major surgery on a creature the size of a building. How is that even possible?" "Carefully," Sarah replied. "The Zephyrians have some impressive biotechnology that we can adapt. Plus, I have some ideas about scaling up our medical equipment." Thrixek leaned forward. "What would this surgery involve, human doctor?" Sarah pulled up a detailed schematic. "We'd need to create an opening large enough to access the infected bone area. That means cutting through about 3 feet of hide, muscle, and connective tissue. Then we remove all the infected material and clean out the wound cavity. Finally, we close everything up and begin antibiotic treatment." "The risks?" asked Vithara. "Significant," Sarah admitted. "Blood loss, infection from the surgery itself, complications from anesthesia. But without treatment, Corvash will die within the next few decades anyway, and it will be a slow, painful death." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "This isn't just about saving one creature. If we can successfully treat Corvash, it proves that human and Zephyrian medicine can work together to solve problems that neither could handle alone. That's valuable for both our species." Ambassador Thrixek's antennae began to vibrate rapidly, which Sarah had learned indicated deep thought. "Human doctor, if you are willing to attempt this healing, we will provide whatever assistance we can. Great Corvash has been the guardian of our largest settlement for over 400 years. Its presence brings us comfort and protection." "Protection?" "The great ones are peaceful, but their size alone deters the few predatory species on our world. More importantly, they are connected to the planet's ecosystem in ways we don't fully understand. Losing Corvash would be felt across the entire continent." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This was no longer just about treating a sick animal. This was about preserving a keystone species and building bridges between two civilizations. "Then we'd better make sure we succeed," she said. The preparation phase took 2 weeks and required resources from both the human colony and 3 different Zephyrian settlements. Sarah found herself working 18-hour days, coordinating between species with completely different approaches to medicine and technology. "The anesthesia is going to be our biggest challenge," she explained to Dr. Reeves, the colony's chief pharmacologist, during their daily video briefing. "We need something that can safely sedate a 50,000-ton creature without causing cardiac or respiratory depression. I've been running simulations based on the tissue samples you sent," Dr. Reeves replied from her lab on the human colony. The good news is that Corvash's metabolism is remarkably similar to terrestrial mammals, just scaled up enormously. I think we can adapt our standard anesthetic protocols. What about dosage? That's where it gets tricky. We're talking about enough anesthetic to sedate a small city. I've been working with the engineering team to design a delivery system that can handle the volume we need. Meanwhile, Sarah was collaborating with Zephyrian biotechnicians to modify their surgical tools for the unprecedented scale of the operation. The Zephyrians had developed sophisticated tissue manipulation technology, but nothing designed for creatures of Corvash's size. Our standard healing implements work by resonating with cellular structures, explained Kethan, the lead biotechnician. But Great Corvash's hide is too thick for the resonance to penetrate effectively. Sarah studied the delicate crystalline tools that the Zephyrians used for their surgical procedures. They were beautiful and incredibly precise, but clearly designed for beings their own size. What if we could amplify the resonance, she suggested. Human technology is pretty good at signal amplification. Theoretically possible, but we would need to understand the exact frequency patterns our tools use. This led to 3 days of intensive collaboration between human engineers and Zephyrian biotechnicians. Sarah watched with fascination as the two groups shared knowledge, each contributing expertise that the other lacked. The humans provided advanced electronics and power systems, while the Zephyrians shared their deep understanding of biological resonance and tissue manipulation. The result was a hybrid tool that looked like something from science fiction, a crystalline Zephyrian healing device housed in a human-built amplification matrix that could scale its effects up by several orders of magnitude. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, examining the prototype. "But will it work on living tissue at this scale?" "Only one way to find out," said Chief Engineer Rodriguez, who had flown in from the colony specifically for this project. "We've tested it on samples of Corvash's hide that you collected. The resonance patterns seem to work, but we won't know about precision until we try it in actual surgery." While the technical preparations continued, Sarah found herself spending more time with Corvash. The massive creature had grown accustomed to her presence, and she'd developed a routine of daily examinations and what could only be called bedside manner. "How are you feeling today, big guy?" she would ask each morning, running her hands along the infected foot to check for changes in temperature or swelling. Corvash had begun responding to her voice, turning its enormous head toward her when she approached and making soft, rumbling sounds that the Zephyrians interpreted as contentment. More importantly, the creature seemed to understand that Sarah was trying to help. "Great Corvash has accepted you," observed Vithara during one of these visits. "This is unusual. The Great Ones typically only bond with Zephyrians." "Maybe pain is a universal language," Sarah replied, gently probing an area of particularly inflamed tissue. "Or maybe Corvash just wants to get better." "Perhaps. But I think there is something more. You touch Great Corvash with confidence, but also with compassion. That is rare in healers of any species." Sarah felt honored by the observation. Working with Corvash had become deeply personal for her. The creature's quiet endurance in the face of centuries of pain reminded her why she had become a doctor in the first place. The breakthrough came during the second week of preparation. Sarah had been struggling with the logistics of the actual surgery, specifically how to maintain a sterile environment while operating on a creature too large to move to a medical facility. "We bring the medical facility to Corvash," she announced during the morning briefing with both human and Zephyrian teams. "Explain," requested Thrixek. Sarah pulled up architectural plans she'd been working on with the colony's construction team. "We build a sterile surgical environment around the patient. Modular components, atmospheric control, full operating room capability, but designed to be assembled on site." Engineer Rodriguez whistled softly. "That's ambitious. We're talking about a portable hospital." "More like a portable operating room the size of an aircraft hangar," Sarah corrected. The Zephyrians have portable atmospheric management technology that we can adapt. Combined with our modular construction techniques, it should be possible. The project required another week and the combined efforts of both species, but the result was impressive. The portable surgical facility looked like a transparent dome large enough to house a small building, complete with sterile air circulation, surgical lighting, and monitoring equipment scaled for Corvash's size. "It's the largest sterile environment ever constructed on this planet," Dr. Patel commented during the final inspection. "Hopefully it's large enough," Sarah replied, checking the equipment one final time. The night before the surgery, Sarah couldn't sleep. She found herself walking through the Zephyrian settlement, marveling at how much the two species had accomplished working together. The portable surgical facility gleamed in the light of the binary moons, surrounded by equipment and personnel from both civilizations. She was surprised to find Ambassador Thrixek standing near Corvash, apparently engaged in what could only be described as conversation. The Zephyrian was making a series of complex clicking and humming sounds, while Corvash responded with gentle rumbles. "Sorry to interrupt," Sarah said quietly as she approached. "Not at all, human doctor. I was simply informing Great Corvash about tomorrow's procedure." "Can it understand you?" "The Great Ones are more intelligent than most beings realize. Corvash understands that tomorrow will bring either healing or death. It has chosen to trust in your skill." Sarah felt the weight of that trust settle on her shoulders. "No pressure," she muttered. Thrixek made the wind chime sound that Sarah had learned was Zephyrian laughter. Indeed, no pressure at all. Only the life of one of the oldest and most revered creatures on our world, the success of the first major medical collaboration between our species, and the potential future of human-Zephyrian relations. When you put it like that, it sounds almost manageable. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching Corvash's massive chest rise and fall with each breath. The creature's eyes were open, reflecting the moonlight like still pools. "Human doctor," Thrixek said eventually, "regardless of tomorrow's outcome, what you have attempted here will not be forgotten. You could have ignored Great Corvash's suffering, as our own healers eventually did. Instead, you saw pain and chose to act." Sarah reached out to touch Corvash's leg one more time. "That's what doctors do. At least it's what they should do." "Perhaps. But in my experience, most beings become comfortable with the suffering of others when that suffering has persisted long enough. You did not." Sarah spent another hour with Corvash before finally returning to her quarters for a few hours of rest. Tomorrow would either be the greatest success of her career or a catastrophic failure that could set back human-Zephyrian relations for decades. Surgery day dawned clear and bright, with both suns visible in the alien sky. The surgical team assembled at first light, a mixture of human doctors and Zephyrian healers who had spent weeks learning to work together. "Anesthesia team, report," Sarah called out as she reviewed the final preparations. "Ready to proceed," Dr. Reeves confirmed from her position near the massive anesthesia delivery system. "We've got enough sedative to drop a blue whale, scaled up for Corvash's metabolism." "Surgical team?" "All instruments sterile and ready," confirmed Dr. Kim, the human surgeon who had volunteered to assist. "The Zephyrian healing tools have been calibrated and tested." "Monitoring?" "Full vital sign monitoring in place," reported Vithara. "Heart rate, brain activity, respiratory function, all within normal parameters for a healthy Titanoth." Sarah took a deep breath. Around them, the portable surgical facility hummed with quiet efficiency. Every piece of equipment had been tested and retested. Both human and Zephyrian medical teams had rehearsed the procedure dozens of times. "All right, everyone, let's make history." The first challenge was administering the anesthesia. Corvash accepted the initial injections calmly, seeming to understand that this was part of the healing process. But inducing unconsciousness in a creature of that size required precise timing and careful monitoring. Brain activity decreasing, Vithara reported. Approaching optimal surgical levels. Respiratory rate holding steady, added Dr. Kim. Heart rate stable but elevated, Dr. Reeves observed. Normal stress response to anesthesia. Sarah watched the massive creature slowly relax as the sedatives took effect. Corvash's breathing deepened, and the tension that had been visible in the creature's posture for centuries finally began to ease. Surgical anesthesia achieved, Dr. Reeves announced. We have a window of approximately 8 hours based on metabolic calculations. Sarah nodded grimly. 8 hours to perform surgery that would normally require 12 to 16 hours on a human patient. But they had planned for this constraint. Beginning surgical approach, she announced. The first incision was both terrifying and surreal. Sarah had never cut through tissue that was measured in feet rather than inches. The hybrid Zephyrian human surgical tools worked beautifully, though, allowing for precise cuts through Corvash's incredibly thick hide. Excellent tissue separation, Dr. Kim observed. The resonance cutting is much cleaner than I expected. Bleeding is minimal, added Vithara, using Zephyrian biotechnology to seal blood vessels as they worked. Great Corvash's healing systems are remarkably efficient. As they worked deeper into the infected area, the full extent of the damage became clear. The bacterial infection had been eating away at Corvash's bone structure for decades, creating cavities and weakened areas throughout the foot's skeletal system. This is worse than the scans indicated, Sarah said, examining the infected tissue with a mixture of dismay and determination. But it's still treatable. We just need to be more aggressive about removing damaged material. The next 6 hours were a blur of intense, focused work. Sarah found herself operating at a scale and with tools she'd never imagined. Removing infected bone tissue with instruments that hummed with alien energy while monitoring vital signs on displays that showed readings unlike anything in human medical textbooks. Irrigation complete, Dr. Kim reported during the final phases of the surgery. All infected tissue removed and cavity cleaned. Antibiotic implants in place, Vithara added. Local drug delivery should prevent reinfection during the healing process. Beginning closure, Sarah announced, starting the long process of sealing the surgical site. The final sutures were completed with barely an hour to spare before Corvash's anesthesia would begin to wear off. Sarah stepped back from the massive surgical site, exhausted but cautiously optimistic. How did we do? She asked the monitoring team. All vital signs stable throughout the procedure, Vithara reported. Blood loss was minimal, no signs of surgical complications. Infection markers are already beginning to improve, added Dr. Reeves, checking the latest blood analysis. The antibiotic therapy appears to be working. Sarah looked at Corvash's peaceful form, the surgical site neatly closed and protected by synthetic biological dressings that would dissolve as the tissue healed. Now we wait, she said. Corvash's recovery was unlike anything in medical literature from either species. The massive creature regained consciousness gradually over the course of 6 hours, with Sarah monitoring every breath and heartbeat. When those enormous eyes finally opened and focused on her, she felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly brought her to tears. "Hello, B. Beautiful," she whispered, placing her hand on Corvash's massive forehead. "How are you feeling?" The creature's response was a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground. But for the first time since Sarah had met Corvash, the rumble didn't carry undertones of pain. "Vitals are excellent," reported Dr. Kim, checking the monitoring equipment. "Brain activity normal, cardiovascular function strong, no signs of post-surgical complications." Over the following days, Sarah maintained a constant vigil beside Corvash. The surgical site was healing remarkably well, with the Zephyrian biotechnology promoting tissue regeneration at a rate that amazed the human medical team. More importantly, Corvash was beginning to show signs of improvement that went far beyond the surgical repair. "Look at how it's positioning its weight," Sarah pointed out to Thrixek on the third day post-surgery. For the first time, Corvash is putting normal pressure on the repaired foot. The ambassador's antennae vibrated with what Sarah had learned was excitement. "Great Corvash has not moved normally in my lifetime. This is remarkable." But the most dramatic change came on the 7th day after surgery. Sarah was conducting her morning examination when she noticed Corvash shifting its massive body in a way she'd never seen before. Instead of the careful, pain-avoiding movements that had characterized the creature's behavior for centuries, Corvash was stretching and flexing with obvious comfort. "I think our patient wants to stand up," Sarah announced to the assembled medical team. "Is it safe?" asked Dr. Reeves, who had remained on site to monitor the recovery. Sarah checked the latest scans of the surgical site. The bone regeneration was proceeding ahead of schedule, with new tissue growth that was actually stronger than the original bone structure. "The repair site looks solid," she said, "and honestly, movement is probably good for the healing process at this point." They watched in awe as Corvash slowly, carefully levered itself to a standing position. The massive creature tested its weight distribution, then took a tentative step forward with the previously injured foot. Then another. Then, to everyone's amazement, Corvash began to walk with a steady, even gait that showed no sign of the limp that had characterized its movement for 2 centuries. "By the ancient spirits," breathed Vithara. "Great Corvash walks as it did in the stories of my great-grandmother." The transformation was remarkable not just physically, but behaviorally. Within 2 weeks of the surgery, Corvash was moving freely across the landscape for the first time in generations. The creature's entire demeanor had changed, from the resigned endurance of chronic pain to something approaching joy. Sarah found herself spending hours just watching Corvash explore areas of its territory that it hadn't been able to visit in decades. The creature moved with a grace that belied its enormous size, and there was something almost playful in the way it would occasionally break into what could only be described as a run. "It's like watching a completely different animal," she told Commander Mills during one of their regular video conferences. "The implications go way beyond veterinary medicine," Mills replied. "The Zephyrians are calling this a miracle. Ambassador Thrixek says it's changed how his entire species views human capabilities." This was true. Word of Corvash's healing had spread throughout Zephyrian society, and Sarah found herself something of a celebrity among the alien settlements. More importantly, the success had opened doors to collaboration that had been previously unimaginable. "We would like to propose a formal medical exchange program," Thrixek announced during a ceremony held 3 weeks after the surgery. "Zephyrian healers would study human medical techniques, while human doctors would learn our biotechnology." "That sounds like an excellent idea," Sarah replied, though she was more focused on watching Corvash demonstrate its renewed mobility to a gathering of Zephyrians who had traveled from across the continent to witness the creature's recovery. But the real surprise came a month after the surgery, when Sarah made a discovery that would reshape understanding of the Titanoth species entirely. She was conducting a routine follow-up scan of Corvash's repaired foot when she noticed something unusual in the imaging data. The bone regeneration was proceeding normally, but there were additional structures developing that hadn't been present before the surgery. "Dr. Kim, can you take a look at this?" she called, reviewing the scans with growing confusion. "What am I looking at?" Dr. Kim asked, studying the images. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. These structures weren't there last week." Vithara joined them, examining the scans with the expertise of a Zephyrian healer. "Human doctor, I believe Great Corvash is developing new bone matrix in areas that were never damaged." That's impossible. Bone regeneration doesn't work like that. Perhaps not in smaller species, Vithara said thoughtfully, but the great ones may be different. Further investigation revealed something that amazed both human and Zephyrian scientists. The successful treatment of Corvash's infection had somehow triggered a planet-wide regenerative response in all the remaining Titanoth. The other 11 creatures scattered across the continent were showing signs of enhanced healing and cellular regeneration. It's like they're all connected somehow, Sarah explained to an emergency joint scientific conference. Healing one appears to have boosted the immune and regenerative systems of the entire population. Dr. Patel, attending via video link, shook her head in amazement. We're looking at a completely unknown biological phenomenon, some kind of species-wide healing network. This explains why the Zephyrians consider the Titanoth so important to their ecosystem, added Thrixek. The Great Ones are connected not just to each other, but to the entire biosphere of our world. The discovery led to an intensive research collaboration that would continue for years, but Sarah found herself most interested in the immediate effects. Corvash had become more than just a patient who had been successfully treated. The creature had become a symbol of what was possible when different species worked together to solve seemingly impossible problems. You started something big, didn't you? She said to Corvash during one of her daily visits. The massive creature had taken to following her around whenever she was in the area, displaying an affection that was both touching and slightly overwhelming. Corvash responded with a complex series of vocalizations that the Zephyrians interpreted as contentment and gratitude. But Sarah thought she heard something more in those rumbling sounds, something that suggested intelligence and awareness beyond what anyone had previously attributed to the Titanoth. I think you understand a lot more than we give you credit for, she murmured, running her hands along the creature's massive side. 6 months after the surgery, Sarah received an unexpected communication from Earth. The story of Corvash's healing had reached the home planet, and the medical community was fascinated by the implications of the interspecies collaboration. The Xenobiological Medical Institute wants to establish a permanent research station on Kepler 442b, Dr. Patel informed her during their weekly conference. They're particularly interested in studying the Titanoth healing network phenomenon. That's wonderful, Sarah replied, though part of her felt protective of Corvash and the other Titanoth. As long as the research is conducted ethically. Of course. In fact, they want you to head up the new facility. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. It would mean a permanent commitment to life on Kepler 442b, far from Earth and everything familiar. But as she watched Corvash moving freely across the landscape, she realized the decision was easy. I accept, she said, on one condition. What's that? Any research on the Titanoth has to be approved by both human and Zephyrian medical ethics committees. These creatures aren't just subjects for study. They're intelligent beings who deserve respect and protection. Agreed. I think you've proven that collaboration works better than exploitation anyway. A year after the surgery, Sarah stood in the observation deck of the new Xenobiological Research Institute, watching Corvash lead a small herd of Titanoth across the purple grasslands. The creature's recovery had been complete, but more importantly, its healing had sparked a renaissance in understanding of planetary ecosystems and interspecies medicine. The collaboration between humans and Zephyrians had expanded beyond medicine into agriculture, technology, and even art. The two species had discovered that their different approaches to problem-solving complemented each other beautifully, leading to innovations that neither could have achieved alone. Any regrets about staying? Asked Dr. Kim, who had also accepted a permanent position at the Research Institute. Sarah watched Corvash play with 2 juvenile Titanoth, the massive creatures engaging in behavior that no scientist had documented in decades. The species was thriving in ways that went far beyond simple population numbers. None at all, she said. "This is where the future is being built." That evening, as both suns set over the alien landscape, Sarah made her way to the place where Corvash usually rested for the night. The creature greeted her with the familiar rumbling sound that had become their personal form of communication. "How are you feeling tonight, old friend?" she asked, running her hands over the spot where the surgical scar had completely healed months ago. Corvash's response was a gentle vibration that Sarah felt through the ground as much as heard. But there was something new in the sound, a complexity that suggested the creature was trying to communicate something specific. "I know," Sarah said softly. "I understand that you're trying to tell me something. Maybe someday we'll figure out how to really talk to each other." As she prepared to leave, Corvash did something unprecedented. The massive creature carefully lowered its enormous head until it was level with Sarah, then gently pressed its forehead against her chest in what could only be described as a hug. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her arms around as much of Corvash's head as she could reach. "You're welcome," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me." As she walked back toward the research facility, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. It had started with simple compassion for a creature in pain and had evolved into something that would change the future of multiple species. Behind her, Corvash settled down for the night with a deep, contented sigh that carried across the landscape like distant thunder. For the first time in 2 centuries, the ancient creature rested without pain, surrounded by its fellow Titanoth in a world where different species had learned to heal each other. In the distance, the lights of human and Zephyrian settlements twinkled like stars against the alien landscape, symbols of a cooperation that had begun with one doctor's refusal to accept that suffering was simply part of life. Sometimes, Sarah thought as she watched the binary moons rise over Kepler 442b, the most important medical breakthroughs came not from advanced technology or complex procedures, but from the simple decision to care about the pain of others, no matter how different they might be. And sometimes healing one life could heal an entire world.